Hey everybody, this is Kelly, and welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. It's still June and it's still Pride Month. I want to talk to you this month only about things specific to the LGBTQIA plus community. Today, the topic that I want to talk to you about is internalized homophobia. It is the internalization of the meaning and judgments that society has put on those in the homosexual community. When someone grows up in a society that believes homosexuality is, say, unnatural, it's understandable that they would develop the idea that they are unnatural if they identify in that way. Much like if you call somebody stupid over and over again, they're going to understand themselves to be stupid until they're able to go back and retrain their brain to understand that they are not, in fact, stupid. Somebody who grows up understanding homosexuality to be unnatural or wrong or icky or whatever it is that people have told them, once they realize that they fall into that category, they are going to apply those lessons to themselves. The bigger picture issue for internalized homophobia is the damage that it really does do to someone's psyche and to their ability to maintain relationships, to build relationships, and to see themselves as someone worthy of love in their lives. When someone receives the message over and over again, there's something wrong with them, it does become part of their narrative. I'm not going to debate the reality or lack of reality of the statement there's something unnatural about homosexuality. That's actually going to be my next video, so you can wait for that one if you want to hear that. But right now, I want to talk as one-on-one as I can get in a video format about the idea of the messages that we hold on to from childhood about homosexuality and about those who are within that community. And when you apply it to yourself, it looks a little bit different. I want to talk about some of the dangers of holding those emotions and opinions of people and the ways that it really does keep us from our best selves and living our happiest life. This topic may seem really simple, but y'all, just last week, the Supreme Court decided that people who are gay or trans are allowed to keep their jobs and they're not allowed to be fired just because of that. It took the Supreme Court until last week to say, oh, by the way, people who are gay have the same rights as people who are not. While it might feel like we've come really far into affirming in our country, and we have, even just in my lifetime, I've seen huge changes. The fact is, policy does not match always how people deal with these things in their homes. Queer children do not grow up with adult examples of themselves in their homes, typically. Because of that, it becomes very difficult to envision yourself as a whole, healthy, relationally mature human being because you don't see examples of that. And you kind of have to figure it out yourself. You have to look to the news and to the media and to books. There's this thing called stress theory, and stress theory is very, very simply just the theory that we change based on pressures that are on us. So then there's minority stressors. Those are the effects of having to make who you are less in order to fit into the majority. So for instance, anytime you have to wear the clothes that fit your sex assigned at birth, even though you are a trans person, in order to pass or in order to feel safe. It's anytime that a same-sex couple has to refrain from holding hands or kissing or even sitting too close to each other because they're afraid of the response from people around them. It's so stressful to have to pass, to have to hide, to have to present in a certain way in order to make others around you comfortable. That also bleeds into things like coming out to people. I also have another video about coming out, so we're not going to get into that super deep right now. But the fact is, the expectation of the cisgender heterosexual world is that if somebody cares about you, they'll tell you who they are. And so if you are friends with someone and they don't come out to you or they don't reveal to you certain aspects of their life, I've seen that become very personal for cisgender straight people. I've seen that become very combative in some situations. It's this weird phenomenon where heterosexual people feel that they have the right to that information. I can honestly say I've never felt like I have the right to the information of whether or not two people who appear to be together are actually in a relationship or if they're actually sleeping together. That's not something that I feel like I have the right to, but for whatever reason, I definitely have come into contact with people in my life who feel like they have a right to that same information from me. I don't really know how we got here. I don't know how that got interpreted as the measure of a close relationship with someone, that they are 100% honest with you about all of the things that are vulnerable. It's not really an appropriate expectation for someone who is part of the majority to have for someone who is in the minority here. It's not an appropriate expectation to think that if it doesn't concern you, to think that they would feel the need to tell you about their relationship status, about their sexual orientation. Those are things that people disclose if and when they want to, and that is it. And the reason that that's important for this video and not just for the coming out video is because the pressure is also felt by the person in the queer community. They feel the pressure to validate their relationships. They feel the pressure to hide their relationships. Either of those are damaging psychologically. Part of the goal of mental health is to keep all of the pieces of ourselves working in tandem together, working in harmony together, to be able to present as a whole and complete human being. When you are somebody who identifies in the queer community and you are in a straight or cisgender situation, it is often threatening, it is often dangerous emotionally, sometimes, a lot of times physically, to give that information out. Having to hide those parts of you repeatedly for long periods of time will take a toll on your mental health. It causes anxiety, it causes stress, it causes depression, because somewhere in your psyche and somewhere in the message you've gotten your whole life, you have been told not just that something about you is unacceptable, but it is your requirement, it is your obligation to allow people to know this information about you so that they can also know you fully. For someone who's a member of the queer community, there is an enormous amount of pressure to either hide who you are or put it out there so far that people don't have to address you and ask the question. And many people fall somewhere in between those two extremes, but the real feeling of the extremes are there. The understanding that you are different from what you expected yourself to always be and what others around you always expect you to be comes with a weight of, well, where do I go from here? How do I forge forward? How do I find my path in life and find the people that are going to be safe emotionally and physically to share this information with? And what does that look like for my future? It is very common for people who are dealing with internalized homophobia to not know they're dealing with it. It rears up in ways like self-sabotaging relationships. It rears up in things like an expectation of yourself that is very centered around heteronormativity, around gender roles, around an understanding that there's something fundamentally unacceptable about you, because how could it not be, right? How could you not think that there's something fundamentally unacceptable? How could you not think there's something fundamentally unacceptable about yourself when, again, in 2020, you're still waiting on Supreme Court to remind everybody that you are just as worthy of protection as people who are straight and cisgender? I know there's a lot of people out there who watch this who are in ministry as Christians, and I want to take a minute to just talk to you and tell you that arguably the biggest problem when it comes to internalized homophobia, the biggest entity that pushes people into internalized homophobia is the church. As an entity, the church pushes a lot of heteronormativity. It pushes a great deal of purity ethics, of value placed in your ability to save yourself for marriage, or your ability to please God. And to please God, you usually have to deny yourself. That message is implicit in so many things that we tell young people within the church community. And the reason that I think that's important for you to know is, if you are watching this, if you are still watching this, then you're clearly somebody who wants to see how to make that not a thing. So here's some ideas. First of all, stop using purpling. Stop it, okay? Over 20 years in youth ministry, I get it, but I also stopped doing this. Boys are blue, girls are red, put them together, they make purple. Don't purple. That's so problematic. That's so problematic. First of all, the idea that a certain color is bad is really problematic. Secondly, the idea that the only potential combination of the two is also problematic. When you make that statement, really think about the assumptions that you're carrying into it. That first of all, you're assuming that everyone identifies as the gender that they present themselves to be. Problematic. Secondly, you're assuming that everyone there who's presenting themselves the gender that they are assumed to be also is attracted to the opposite gender. Problematic. Then you're assuming the only thing that come of two people being together is some sort of a sexual relationship. Problematic. Stop doing it. Separating into girl and guy groups for things, female, male, small groups. There is more to affinity than sex assigned at birth. And especially these days, you're going to get more out of a discussion when you pair people up by similar interests than you are when you pair people up by similar body parts, okay? Stop doing that. Also, stop talking about marriage like it is the goal of everyone's life. Not everybody wants to get married. Even the Bible doesn't talk about marriage the way that a lot of Christians talk about marriage, and that's really problematic. For some people, relationships aren't really the goal. The things that we spend the most time talking about, the things that we spend the most time teaching to these students while in ministry, that's the message they're going to carry away. And they're going to carry away a message that you don't give just as much, sometimes more, as a message that you do. If every person in front of you was trans, would you give your message in the same way? If everybody in front of you was asexual, would you give your talk in the same way? Similar to the specific outlined things, you also need to think about the implicit things, the way that you joke with people when you ask for a bunch of people to move chairs. Do you say, "Hey, can I get 5 or 6 people to move chairs?" Or, "Hey, can I get 5 or 6 guys to move chairs?" Do you ask the girls to help set up for dinner? How do you play those things out in your language? Be aware of your language. Be aware of the way that you talk to people and the ways that you joke with them, because what you're implying in those conversations are the messages they're going to carry away about themselves and their worthiness. And when you're dealing with such a vulnerable population like those in the LGBTQIA plus community, especially as teenagers, you can't be too careful when it comes to your phrasing. The facts of internalized homophobia play out in the lives of queer people from a Christian background so much more strongly than almost any other grouping. And that's because there is the expectation that gender is essential. There's the expectation that sex is what everyone wants, and they want it within the bounds of a married relationship. There is the expectation that there's acceptable and there's unacceptable to God, and those who identify as queer fall in the unacceptable category. I also want to talk to you about the very problematic phrase of hate the sin but love the sinner. That's super weird, especially when you're dealing with a group of people for whom their sexual orientation, their gender expression, or their gender identity is part of who they are. You can't separate that out then, and that makes them something that you hate. So how do we deal with this? What do we do when someone realizes that they're dealing with internalized homophobia, when someone realizes that they're dealing with the idea that they are less than acceptable because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity or their gender expression? One of the ways, obviously, I'm going to advocate for therapy, because this would be a terrible Ask a Therapist video if I didn't. But more than that, group therapy, when you can get together, it goes back to that minority stressors idea that I was talking about. If you get together with other people who want the same thing, where they want to come to the other side of this, where internalized homophobia is not something that they're dealing with anymore, where they're able to really see the truth in the messages that they've been given and reject what is not true and accept themselves as whole, beautiful, fantastic human beings, and not carry around those messages that the world has given them for so long. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you understand a little bit better what internalized homophobia is and how we can work through that together. If you're interested in finding a group therapy group for this very topic, just go ahead and message me and I will hook you up with some people that you should probably talk to. I hope you have a great week and happy Pride.